Canadian Foreign Policy Hour, a critical look at Canada's role abroad. And I'm Eve Engler. This is about the 140th week, uh, almost in a row, of episodes of the Canadian Foreign Policy Hour. I have to be out at about 5 to 7 tonight. So I'm going to get right to it. I'm coming to you from Jojage, which has long been a meeting place of various First Nations, otherwise known as Montreal. Uh, the UN is reporting that we're on path to 3.1 degrees Celsius of temperature increase, which is catastrophic. And Canada, of course, is a outsized global emitter. There's a story about the in the Hill Times. It's actually from 2 weeks ago, maybe, but I just read it. Saudi Canadian Business Council has restarted after a 5-year hiatus, and there's also the opening of an office of the Federation of Saudi Chambers in Toronto. So the sort of it was always much hyped, but the sort of bad relations with Saudi Arabia have really got right back on track, and the whole Kosaji, or I forget how you put the former Washington Post columnist, his murder in the embassy in Turkey has been forgotten, and other conflicts over human rights questions have been dropped. The NDP, I have a Canada Congo Google News search so I have a whole bunch of these Google Canada Congo, Canada Haiti, Canada Guatemala, whatever different subjects, Google News searches that I get kind of regular daily, Canada Palestine, whatever. And in one of these, the Canada Congo one, there was an NDP statement on United Nations Day 2024. And it was mostly about like peacekeeping, and mentions that there's been dozens of UN peacekeepers killed in the Democratic Republic of Congo. And this email, this really kind of like, I mean, I knew it right away when I saw it. I knew there was no chance that in the NDP statement about Canada, UN, UN, and Congo, that there would be nothing about the role that the UN mission in early 1960s played in the assassination of Patrice Lumumba, and specifically Canada's central role in that. I knew that, but it also reminded me of that, of how it's there's basically no space in official politics. None of the MPs will talk about the bad of Canadian foreign policy history. It's basically they will mythologize the past as a way to criticize current, but there's basically no space. Maybe that's too strong. Maybe there's a little bit of criticism of the war in Afghanistan, maybe would be one example. But I really can't think of almost any example of any of that kind of backwards historic criticism. And we're going towards a time of the year where this is further on display, which of course is a Remembrance Day, and there will be a whole outpouring of militarist nationalism, and we'll be basically told that World War I was a great, that's how we saved democracy, and all this kind of nonsense. There was a weird post from some anarchist Instagram. I couldn't really read the whole thing. I just got some caption of it in my Google search. And it's against the red poppy and towards a culture of peace. And it says, paraphrased from Eve Engler. And then goes on to say, a sadist we don't want to associate with, but well researched on Canadian war crimes. And I don't know where they're getting the sadist thing from. I guess I'll take the well researched on Canadian war crimes part, but it just kind of reminded me how much ridiculousness there is out there in left, even in left worlds, of you're an Assadist, or you're a Putinist, and then you're a pro-Chinaist, and then you're an anti-Semite, and then I've had in the past, obviously, you're a Maduroist, or I've also had Aristidist, whatever over the years. But this obviously the next 2 weeks, you're starting to see the poppies already pop up. That's going to be a whole other phase every year of this kind of war, nostalgia, warmongering, and there'll be nothing, including from the NDP MPs. There'll be nothing really that says that Canada's been involved in all kinds of devastating wars, and for that matter, devastating UN missions, be it Congo in the early 60s, Haiti in 2004, Korea early 1950s, Somalia 90s, etc. So there's a story in Barron's that I saw. The Malian government decree basically nationalized uh, a mine that the Malian government had 20% control over. But South Africa's Anglo Gold Ashanti had 40%, and I think it's Toronto, I Am Gold, Canadian company, I Am Gold had 40%. So the Malian government just a couple days ago is basically nationalizing. It's not clear to me all the details of. I don't know. I don't think it's known what the terms of the nationalization are. I think they're compensating the companies, but they are moving this forward. So this is a further step in the nationalistic resource policies that we've seen take place in these countries that have had what seems to be nationalist military coups in the last few years in Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger. And Owen Shaw, who wrote the book on Canada's long fight against democracy, we co-wrote it. He has a piece in Canadian Dimension that goes over some of this. That's worth checking out. Title is In West Africa, Canadian mining firms come up against bloc of independent states. And he shows how the sort of resource nationalism, alongside kicking out of French and US troops, and actually for that matter, Canadian, and some of the deepening ties with the left-wing governments in Latin America that some of these countries are pursuing, and of course the other geopolitical element with Russia, that's also of course playing out in those countries. The G7 leaders agreed to give 50 billion US to Ukraine from frozen Russian assets. Canada's playing a role in that, of course. Just a few hours ago, RT is reporting that there was a elite U.S. Special Forces troop killed in Ukraine, and they're claiming that a Canadian was also killed among these four soldiers that were killed. I don't know if this is correct, but this is what's being reported. It will be interesting to see if anything more comes of this. This week, there was a Canadian parliamentary discussion of disinformation and censorship that included, I think there's three different speakers. There was Christopher Alexander, the former minister in the Harper government. There was Justin Ling, and there was a woman who I'm forgetting her name, from a U.S., I think Syracuse University. And this thing blew up because Chris Alexander, in this parliamentary committee meeting, says that there's these documents that go back, that have been found at the archives, the KGB archives in Kyiv from the Soviet era, that say that David Pugliese, the Ottawa Citizen reporter, was a KGB asset. And I see this on Twitter, so I go and I watch the hearing. I don't watch it all, but I watch 25, 30 minutes, quite a bit of it. And there's so much in there that you just shake your head at, okay? And there's a very good piece that Paul Robinson just published on Canadian Dimension, which I believe is titled Canadian Parliamentary Committee's Hearing on Disinformation was used to propagate disinformation and censorship by self-proclaimed experts who propagated disinformation concerning Ukraine and Canadians. There's a lot in this committee hearing that's unbelievable. Now, Chris Alexander in this thing, he doesn't just sort of state. He says this is these documents, which he doesn't show anybody, but I guess he puts into some like documents of the committee. So presumably the MPs have access to this, and he goes into quite elaborate discussion about how they've been authenticated by all these different sources and this and that. And it says that basically Russian Soviet officials basically started working with Pugliese back in the mid 1980s. And it gets brought up a little bit, right? Like Peter Julian, maybe I'll just leave that for a second, but he gets the other MP, conservative MP, I believe, I think I'm pretty sure he's a Ukrainian Canadian, quite like hawkish on the proxy war. He has a fairly extensive discussion with Alexander about them. Now, according to this piece in the Canadian Dimension, first of all, it should be noted that Chris Alexander cannot be sued for what he says in parliamentary committee meeting. So he has a privilege there. So he is yet to say this in a public forum that Pugliese was on the payroll of the KGB going back to the 80s. And another public outside of parliament, should I say. Now, this piece in Canadian Dimension quotes a global news story, which I haven't read, but it basically says that all the document actually says, and the documents do appear to be sort of like legitimate Russian documents from the 1980s. But all it says is that there's some, they don't name a name. There's just like, they refer to it as somebody who isn't supposed, Alexander's claiming is Pugliese. But they don't say that a payment was made. They don't even say that the person was approached, just that they had an eye on an individual, a reporter, and that it looked like like a promising lead of someone to work with. So we don't know this is actually Pugliese, and there's no evidence that there was actually ever even an approach, let alone Pugliese saying, "Oh yeah, give me some cash and I'll whatever." So for all we know, it's not Pugliese, and it was never even pursued. And if it was pursued, and if it was Pugliese, Pugliese said no, and the world moves on, right? So it's a pretty wild claim. Now, one of the things that's fascinating about it is actually Peter Julian. So that's the NDP MP, and Peter Julian, like he goes with it. He goes with it. He takes this as like a like legitimate, like probably true, whatever, and moves along in the questioning of Alexander. Doesn't come across as like, are you sure? Is there any? And to me, this is just like, wow, how much of the kind of Russia interference, Russian disinformation, Russia whatever Kool-Aid Peter Julian has drunk, because like on the surface of it, this is a wild accusation. 40 years ago, KGB, one of the most prominent, and then if you get into why are they going after Pugliese? They're going after Pugliese very specifically, like recently about his stories on the memorial of communist memorial victims of communist memorial for the victims of communism monument, which he talks about how 330 or the 550 names are like former Nazi types. He just reported that a couple of days ago. Obviously, all those stuff he's done on the Azov training, a whole series. Christian Freeland's, grandfather as a Nazi propagandist. Pugliese's done a whole bunch on NATO proxy war that's embarrassing to those who are into that. And he's also, of course, embarrassed the military more generally. That's far more what he does is different reporting that mostly I would call it like in-house criticism, in the sense of it's like embarrassing the military for its functioning, not necessarily sort of like what we call anti-imperialist or, anti-military kind of stuff, but he also does publish stuff that clearly does go in the direction, stuff on what the Canadian military did in Libya. He's all kinds of reports, documents about how they knew, big long story back in a year or two after the bombing of Libya, where it shows that the military intelligence knew that it was these, jihadist forces that were likely to benefit. This is before the bombing, and they had the military intelligence kind of, basically telling us what would happen if they did this. They knew that long before, and it's Pugliese that released that, got that to the public through, I guess, access information. I'm not exactly sure, but so he's a good reporter. He navigates this box of the corporate media. He's kind of unique in the corporate media in navigating, and he's clearly a total expert on the military. I mean, he's got clearly tons and tons of very good contacts and all this kind of stuff. He's not an anti-imperialist. He's I don't even think I doubt he's even, you call himself a socialist. He's my guess is he's probably like an NDP voter, and like a sort of, he would call himself a sort of I don't know, a loyal critic of Canada, something like that. But obviously he embarrasses a lot of the establishment on stuff. And again, it's remarkable to see Peter Julian's reaction to all this. One of the things that's interesting in this is that Max Fawcett, this kind of comes out of this. I don't know exactly the sequence on Twitter, but Max Fawcett, who is with the National Observer, he's a columnist on the National Observer. He blocked me on Twitter a long time ago. He's a NATO proxy war. I think he blocked me over something around NATO war. I don't know what it was. I'd forgotten about it, and when I saw this recent stuff, I tried to click on his Twitter, and I couldn't do it. But this Duncan Kinney has this exchange with Max Fawcett, and again, National Observer, sort of like, it's this climate, kind of supposed to be sort of lefty-ish kind of outlet, independent, whatever outlet. And he has this exchange with Max Fawcett, who he's got some, I think he's got some, I might be wrong here, but he's got some like ties to the Broadbent Institute or something like that. Max Fawcett's got some background. He's got some credibility in some kind of leftish, NGO-ish kind of world, and he basically is attacking reporting that says, the reports on the Nazi past of Freeland, or the Nazi ties of Ukrainian forces, whatever. And he says, quote, has it occurred to you that advancing this narrative about Ukrainian ties to Nazism very clearly serves Russia's interests and aligns with its own description of Ukraine? And then Duncan Kinney says, do you consider yourself a journalist? Do you think journalists shouldn't report on factual things that are inconvenient to a government narrative? Fawcett responds, Duncan, are you really sure you want to go down this road with me? And then Duncan responds, please go down the road. So yes, of course. Then Fawcett responds, yes, so yes, of course, I'm a journalist. And yes, of course, people should write about things if they're inconvenient to the government's narrative. I do it constantly. But if it advances a foreign government's narrative, then they should tread more carefully there. Now, there's a whole bunch that comes out of this kind of thinking. First of all, and I know, and everyone knows that Max Fawcett reports all kinds of things that advance the US and Canadian government's geopolitical narrative. Of course he does. He's a believer that Putin is the devil, that China's taking over, on and on and on, from Maduro to, so there'll be an endless stream of things that he reports that he just doesn't see it as the Canadian or US government's narrative. But then that level of like sort of subservience to power that a commentator, reporter would be willing to state sort of so openly, and so basically saying, let's shut up about what's going on in Ukraine because it aligns with the Russian narrative, and Russia's bad, and we need to justify putting more weapons and putting more support and whatever into. It's, I think, pretty remarkable to see that stated openly, and I think it's actually, it's widespread opinion, of course, of commentators, but here you see it expressed for the National Observer. Now, I've had all kinds of interaction with the National Observer. The National Observer will not, and I've had them openly suppress stuff on Haiti. They are clearly a pro-imperialist media outlet. That is very clear. Um, I haven't followed them on, actually, I'm following them for quite a while now. I haven't seen much from them for a while, but I'm curious if anybody knows what their coverage on Palestine's been. I'm guessing it's been pretty bad. Uh, um, but yeah. Now, all this, of course, is very important because we are in very perilous times on a geopolitical front. This week, U.S., Canada each sent warships to the Taiwan Strait in a joint operation a few days, week or so after Chinese drills I talked about last week. The North Korea is now reported to have troops 3,000 plus in Russia. And that can mean a lot. Now, it has seemed that came out multiple days ago, and it seemed like there was sort of, well, maybe that was just sort of South Korean or Ukrainian or whatever kind of propaganda. It does seem like this is now confirmed. Putin doesn't seem to be denying it anymore. And this can mean a lot. Russia's a huge country. North Korea and Russia have a border. So we don't know exactly where they are. There is some speculation that they are fighting in Russia, in the Kursk region, against Ukrainian troops. I don't know if that's true. I do think we are seeing a pattern here that is a very dangerous pattern globally here. If you look at Russia, North Korea, and North Korea selling weapons to Russia, now, of course, that's framed in our media as, oh, either the desperate Russians are turning to North Korea, or North Korea is so bad and Russia is so bad, and these baddies are getting together, and it's so illegitimate for North Korea to do that. Now, of course, that's very hypocritical from a Canadian U.S. government that's giving huge amounts of weapons to Ukraine. So, you sell to Russia. I don't think that's I don't think that's a moral thing to do. But in the context of all this, how immoral is it all? We can have an interesting discussion on. But I think what is happening here is we are the camps and the deepening of the kind of anti-US and whatever type things blocks is deepening, right? And North Korea's deepening military ties with Russia in this context is real. It does mean something in a broad geopolitical dimension. And it's only one small piece of all these other things, for instance, these drills in Taiwan Strait I talk about. And then, of course, the Israeli attack against Iran, and 4 Iranian soldiers were killed. There's conflicting reports on what exactly happened, of how successful they were or weren't. I don't really know at this point. The general framing is that is a little bit it was less extreme than some people thought might transpire. That's not exactly clear, and I think the Iranians are going to respond. That seems pretty clear. They're going to respond in some way. There's some speculation they're going to respond by really rapidly moving forward with going for a nuclear weapon. I don't know. That seems unlikely still to me, but that is a possibility. And obviously, there's all kinds of other ways to respond as well. The fighting, Hezbollah is picking up, and of course, Israel's horrors, not only in Gaza, which now have just been going on endlessly and are, absolutely, the extermination plan in northern Gaza is insane. This is just totally bananas what's going on. But also their violence in Lebanon. Just seeing a report that they killed 60 earlier today in Lebanon, and there's a bunch of people under rubble. There's not much more detail on that, but the onslaught in Lebanon is amazing. It's stunning. And Hezbollah is responding, and there is real war. Clearly, Israel has not been very successful in taking territory in southern Lebanon, but they do also seem like they're blowing up an incredible amount of stuff around the border region. So there's a lot of of these coming together of all these conflicts is real, and they are kind of gradually coming together more and more, right? And if you look at the rhetoric from the Russians vis-a-vis Iran and it being an ally, and so there's a lot going on these different geopolitical fronts. Now, Canada's reaction to the bombing in Iran was to put out a statement, not very high up. It was just the Twitter account of I think Global Affairs. It said, "quote Israel has the right to respond to Iran's aggression. Canada demands that Iran take immediate steps to halt its regional proxies' destabilizing attacks on Israel." So it's all blame Israel bombs Iran, and it's all blame Iran. That's the Canadian statement. This Twitter commentator and runs a blog that basically follows the tracking of Canadian military assets, planes and stuff like that. He posted something a couple of days before Israel's attack, and he said, "quote whatever is about to kick off in the Middle East has had the Canadian Armed Forces pre-positioning equipment, supplies, forces in Paphos, which is in Cyprus, since at least October 6th. 5 flights by CC-177 Global Master 1 transports have been part of the operation so far." And then he lists a series of other Air Force shipments and stuff. So he's saying that Canada has positioned a whole bunch of weapons, forces even, preparing for this attack. There is some speculation that the attack ended up being a bit less because of that leak, that the Americans basically leaked info about what Israel's planning as a way to basically pressure them to downgrade the attack. And of course, in that leak, it's the Five Eyes, right? So it's Canada was involved in the intelligence there, or was aware of the intelligence. If those documents are actually legit, which my understanding is people do believe they are. So I would presume now there was this Al Jazeera did a piece where they showed just how much of a air corridor, air bridge, I think is the terminology used, that the British and the Americans have been in terms of sending in weapons and supplies to Israel over the past year. And also intelligence and stuff like that. I don't think there's any chance that Canada's not involved in that. The Canadian military is involved. I guarantee it. I guarantee it. The Canadian spy planes have even been involved in spying Gaza, Lebanon, whatever the region. I would be very surprised if they're definitely involved in the communication security establishment is definitely involved in different intelligence gathering that gets transmitted to Israel. But I bet you find that you actually would be taken aback by how many different forms of military assistance Canada's provided. And this tracking of the flights that is just a further confirmation of that. Today, the Israeli parliament banned UNRWA, the UN Refugee Agency, which provides schooling for millions, I believe it's in the millions, Palestinians, food in Gaza and stuff like that. They are labeling it a terrorist organization. Unbelievable stuff. Canada did sign a statement a couple of days ago as this was moving forward, expressing grave concern over this. This is just, Israel doubling down on their genocidal criminality, starvation policy. The Lancet Medical Journal had a report about pregnancy in Gaza and how it's essentially become almost a death sentence. The conditions have become so bad. It's unbelievable to watch this all transpire. On the note of Canada's support for Israel, in a kind of a ludicrous note of this, I just saw a thing from the Canadian Jewish News saying that on November 3rd, the Canadian Friends of the Israel Guide Dog Centers having their fundraising. And this is one of these charities. There's like a charity for everything you can think of in Israel, right? A Canadian Friends of every university, Canadian Friends of every hospital, Canadian Friends of every museum, Canadian Friends of symphonies in Israel, da 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 da. And the one I thought was just kind of like so kind of outlandish. I mean, not that, the specifics of it aren't probably helpful for the individuals, but Canadian Friends of Israel Guide Dog Society, I think is the title of the charity. And I'm just like, it just speaks to the complete, um, I don't know what the word is of fetishization of just extreme importance given to Israel from almost entirely in terms of these charities, Canada's Jewish community. I also, let's be clear, also the wealth, because these are groups raising lots of money, and there has to be a pool of donors that have resources, and the stats all show this. More than 350 million, no, that's confirmed, 362 in 2022. Mark Bloomberg said that 362 million was sent to Israel by Canadian registered charities. I'm not even sure if that includes the universities. There's a whole other category there, but it's a huge amount of money. That's all taxpayer subsidized stuff. And to me, this Canadian Friends of Israel Guide Dog Society is just emblematic of that. There's hundreds and hundreds of these organizations raising money for projects in Israel, every different type of project you can possibly imagine. The National Post, the whatever they call it, Canadian Association for CAF, I think is the acronym, Anti-Semitism Education or something like that. They gave the National Post editor, Roberts, I believe is his name, a big award a week ago or so. And there was a page, I guess an advertisement thanking whatever I think it was in the National Post, I saw it. And so Conrad Black was there as the founder of the National Post, and it was all the courageous support for the Holocaust in Gaza, kind of, and the National Post, as we've discussed, is completely bananas on the Holocaust in Gaza. But at this ceremony, what I thought was interesting, one of the things I thought was interesting, there's photos, and they have a photo of Salman Sima. I don't know if you're on X and you see this guy he's Iranian Canadian, and he's totally bananas fanatic, goes to all these Palestine demos and carries a Canadian flag and tries to get into fights, and just this extremist kind of hardline activist, whatever. And so he's at this ceremony. So this ceremony is a little bit more like, it's sort of, wealth and whatever, right? It's people like Lord Black, Conrad Black, stuff like that. And then there's this like real kind of like, kind of pretty crass, sort of street activist type, who's there getting fun. He was in two different photos that they put in the paper here, like with the different, I forget who he was with, but with, like, important people. I thought that was kind of telling. On the media front, there was a post about the CBC, the National, sort of from these people on the border with Gaza, these extremist settlers who are basically saying, Gaza should be for Jews, and the CBC reports that, and they cut away, and it's kind of got a fair bit of attention on X. It kind of initiated kind of an interesting backlash, and it was framed as like, how dare the CBC just run with this aggressive Jewish supremacism and then not, like, criticize it at all. And then there's somebody who pushes back saying, well, in fact, they were just laying out the facts, and most people who see that would be appalled to say, like, we got to make Gaza Jewish. And so it's actually, in fact, this was like sort of good journalism. And I agree with both sides in that from the CBC's perspective, this is just to publish this, or to, put it on the air, is a step in the right direction. But of course, if it was a different context, they would not only put that on, they would then have a commentator come in and talk about how bad it was and how immoral it was. And they don't do that on Palestine because they are so scared, and they are still so much following the kind of official line on stuff. And of course, we're seeing this on the media front all over. I had an interesting one. Facebook, what I think is the first time, sent me a thing saying they removed one of my posts, and it was a post about Samidun and about the terrorist list. And as far as I could tell, it was nothing objectionable. It was just, I mean, as I see, what some Zionists wouldn't like it, but it was just me writing about the terrorist list, and they apparently took it down, according to what was sent to me. And that's just a small sign of, it is just happening all over this repression. People may have seen this thing at the Toronto Raptors game. A guy with a Palestine hat got kicked out for wearing this Palestine hat yesterday or 2 days ago. And the guy, a couple rows behind him, this Zionist guy, I guess, like told the security that this guy's hat said Palestine, and then got him kicked out. And you just sort of see the guy taken away by like 8 different security and talking about how it's because of his hat. And of course, Larry Tannenbaum, the owner of Raptors, is one of the founders of CIJA. And after Raptors won back in 2019, he wanted to take the Raptors to Israel. The Toronto police arrested 2 Palestine protesters for wearing COVID masks from back in March. And in their announcement of this, they said you can be arrested months later for something that happened at a demonstration as kind of unimportant as wearing a mask. There's a story in the National Post. This is the kind of where we're going in the fascism of all this. This is the National Post person saying, academic reaction to Israel's war against Hamas has made it plain just how unsalvageable universities as publicly funded institutions have become. Professors just can't help themselves from making arguments that seem to sympathize with those responsible for the October 7 massacre of 1,200 people, mostly civilians, mostly Israelis. So he's basically saying you got to defund all the universities, and it's based upon like that Heidi Matthews, U of T prof, which is totally like international law, legal reasoning. I get it; they don't like what her reasoning, but it's totally founded in law, and it's leading to these people calling for defunding the universities. There's the B'nai B'rith put out a 7-point plan to combat anti-Semitism. And as Dimitri Lascaris put it, I wrote a piece about this for Canada Files about all these last couple of weeks of recent incidents of authoritarian Zionism, the vigilantes, more stuff on the vigilantes, the head of the Toronto police meeting with the vigilantes, being photographed with the Zionist vigilante groups. Incredible stuff. But and B'nai B'rith puts out the 7-point plan, which is just basically suppress everything that says that Palestinians are human beings. And as Dimitri points out, B'nai B'rith's 7-point plan to combat anti-Semitism can be summed up in one word: fascism. Warren Kinsella published a piece saying that Special Rapporteur, who's Albanese, Francesca Albanese, on the Palestinian territories, she should be barred from coming into Canada. Kevin Vong is also saying she should be barred. The Zionist groups, CIJA, have not come out quite so clearly, but they're inching towards that. From what I've seen, maybe they've come out more recently. There's clearly, this is all part of a planned assault against Albanese's tour. So the Canada in Geneva account, I think following NGO Monitor, put out a statement 3-4 days ago, just sort of laying the groundwork for the CIJA, the B'nai B'rith, and all these attacks, saying the recent remarks by Francesca Albanese are unacceptable and incompatible with her duty of impartiality, probity, and good faith as an independent special rapporteur. Anti-Semitism has no place anywhere. And of course, her statement, nothing she said was anti-Semitic. But they're going after, it's going to be a full throttle assault, trying to shut down all her events. And I think it's 4 or 5 cities across the country. And there's a story kind of more, tying this fascism and maybe on the more positive end of things. There's a story in Radio-Canada did a very good story on Sarel. And it's des bénévoles canadiens recrutés pour travailler sur des bases militaires en Israel. And so basically, Sarel recruits Canadians to volunteer on Israeli military bases to do all kinds of things that support the military, like putting weapons in tanks and cleaning and some food stuff and a whole bunch of stuff. And so Sorrell got back on the agenda about a few weeks ago because they had hosted this thing at a Ottawa Jewish Community Center, and there was a protest. And there's been a campaign that principally Shane Martinez, who I interviewed today, I'm going to post a video tomorrow on this issue, has been pursuing on this for about 2 years around Sorrell and their violation of the Foreign Enlistment Act. And it's a fascinating story because he got a justice of the peace to agree to hear the case, and then the Crown that there was enough evidence that this case should go forward through this private prosecution because the policing authorities weren't moving forward, refused to move forward with it. And he got a justice of peace to agree that there was enough evidence that the case should go forward. And then the Crown stepped in and used a special power to squash the whole thing. And now he's got, in November 7th, a case. I don't fully understand the legal steps and how you do this, but that to bring the case on, and he thinks there's a chance to get it back on track, that there will actually be a case on Israel violating the Foreign Enlistment Act. And so this rally at the Ottawa Jewish Community Center like 3 weeks ago was against Sorrell. Essentially, in a sense, is calling for the upholding of Canadian law, the Foreign Enlistment Act, on this organization that's probably violating. And then the reaction of the Toronto or Ottawa Mayor Sutcliffe, who I may have mentioned this last week, he called to have these bubble zones around religious institutions and community centers. So basically, no protest zones. So in this case, Zionist organizations could, recruit to support the Israeli military, and you're not allowed to protest it. But in this case, he's basically setting up restricting protests, which are essentially promoting the application of Canadian law. In the case of Sorrell, that's essentially what the protests are actually calling for. So that's it adds another layer to this authoritarian push. And of course, the biggest authoritarian push is on the repression of Samidoun, the listing of as a terrorist entity that took place with Samidoun. And tomorrow night, there's a webinar detailing this on how Canada's terror list enables Israeli terrorism. People can check that out. This week, 15 organizations called on the government to rescind the listing of Samidoun, to stop criminalizing Palestinian advocacy. Also, there's a threat of a lawsuit, a cease and desist, that was sent to Trudeau, Dominique Leblanc, who is the minister in charge, public security minister, and Pierre Poilievre, around their, quote, reckless and maliciously accusing Samidoun of being a terrorist entity. We'll see where that goes. So there is some pushback here in Montreal. I wasn't able actually to go to any of them, but there were 3 demonstrations. I didn't find out about the Friday one until after, but Saturday and Sunday as well. I saw the pictures from the Friday, and it looked like there was about 400 people there or something like that. So there are protests still going. I was able to do a couple challenging of politicians this week. I'm not going to get into, I had a crazy Friday where the Quebec minister, just lo and behold, transport minister was speaking at my son's school at 7:30 in the morning, doing this crosswalk thing on safety around schools, acting like she was a crossing guard, and then I found out where Yara Sachs and Minister Farada were at about 9:30 across to the east of the city. And I was going to go there to ask Yara Sachs, who's an Israeli citizen, and as of 2019, went back to Israel to vote and called it my home. My question was to ask her was as an Israeli citizen, are you concerned with foreign interference in Canada? That was my question I was going to ask. And I actually called. I was able to get them. They didn't say where the venue was on the press release, but I called Sachs's office and just asked for it, and they actually gave it to me. Even though, like, the reason they didn't say where it was is because principally because of me, of course, or and others, but principally because of me. But Sax's person like gave me the address, so I effectively was actually not formally registered, but essentially registered as a journalist. And when I arrive at this hospital out on the east, there's two security from the hospital that are it's outdoors, it's happening outside in this tent. And these two security from the hospital, they're kind of positioned in kind of an intense way. I'm just kind of walking towards it, and then this Sûreté de Québec officer immediately recognizes me. And all I'm doing is going to ask this question. I just want to ask Sierra Sachs. I really wanted to see this question before an interference, get her to, squirm about this. And he comes at me, and then he calls these security that are the private security in the hospital, and they end up actually like beating me pretty bad. They chuck me on the they chuck me on the ground. And this is actually in front of all the journalists at this press conference. And they end up about 10 of these they have 10 of these security basically pinning me down to the point where I almost thought they were actually going to break my arm. And it was like totally completely out of proportion. They steal my phone, refuse to give my phone back for quite a while, detain me, and then cops come, Montreal police come, sirens wailing, like 4 cop cars come, and then I try to then all they're going to do is expel me from the grounds, right? Because I didn't do anything. I was walking to a friggin' press conference, which I had called the friggin' communications person, but the Sûreté Québec now. So there happened to be a minister from the Quebec government at this press conference, which I was not like, wasn't on my radar because there was 2 federal ministers who were on my radar to ask questions of, and the Sûreté Québec. So all Quebec ministers always have a Sûreté Québec with them at all times. Even the head of the party, even the Gabriel Nadeau-Dubois from Quebec Solidaire seems to have Sûreté Québec officer with them regularly, and the federal ministers don't do that necessarily, okay? And so now basically whenever they see me, so I had this happen a week ago, and I haven't actually published the image of it. I go to a press conference last week, earlier in the week, it was a Monday, I may have talked about last thing, and I go in there, I'm standing, I give my name to multiple media people for the minister, the Quebec minister. And as I'm giving it to the last one, all of a sudden this guy comes, I can't see, comes and starts saying, no, 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 no. And he's this huge Sûreté de Québec officer who just kicks me out. So the media person for the minister is fine. She's setting up that I'm about to be able to ask the Quebec minister a question, but the Sûreté de Québec overrides this and is kicking me out. Now, the Sûreté Québec has absolutely no right to just kick me out. They're like as if there's a directive that says Yves Engler can't ask questions of Quebec ministers, and in this case, not just Quebec ministers, federal ministers. And whoever else happens to be at this event, right? That's what they basically have now moved towards. I think I'm going to have to send some sort of legal letter to the Sûreté de Québec to say, is there a directive that says Yves Engler is not allowed to attend press conferences where there's any minister, or for that matter, even opposition figures that we send agents to follow. And the reason I say this thing about this Friday morning, so Friday morning, there's a Quebec minister at the school of my kid, and so I anyways do some interviews with the media on the question of safety and cars. Not I was going to ask the minister about Palestine. I didn't end up, and then I go to where she has the press conference after, which is in the courtyard of my son's school, and I end up asking a question about cars and safety and why the minister's promoting more cars, and that's the big threat to kids. So it's really hypocritical. You say, oh, we're going to do some stuff to reduce the threat at the school, and yet you're calling for more cars, and that's the big end. As I'm asking this question of the minister in the press scrum, just at the back, the security agent like gets close to me. So at some point he recognizes me, but I guess because it's my kids goes to that school, and I say that as I'm asking a question, he's a little bit more like, I'm not going to like force him out of this school ground, public school, whatever. But so in this case, I'm able to have a question, like with no problem, just like, it's the minister doesn't like my question, but it's just political. There's nothing dangerous about it. And then an hour and a half, 2 hours later, I get brutally assaulted for trying to do the same thing. And then an hour later, after I get brutally assaulted, I then find out where there's this press conference where Stéphane Guilbeault and Montreal Mayor Valérie Plante are, and I actually go to that. And I'm able to actually had a very I really enjoyed the clip with Guilbeault, who just he anyway, long story, but he basically tries to sneak out the back, and whole process. I leave and I come back around last time, and I see him leaving, and he ends up walking right towards me, and then have this whole thing of me asking him a question, and he runs back into the venue where he's left from. It's like the most stunningly embarrassing thing for him. But on that note, I'll leave it at that. I have time for maybe a handful of questions. It's I should get out in 4 or 5 minutes here, and I'll make Laura a co-host.
Okay. Hi. I don't see actually any hands up. So I just wanted to ask you one question myself. When you were talking about Iran, so I was listening to a different commentators talking about the strikes in Iran. I was wondering if this is what you had heard. Two of them, one a CIA military analyst, and the other one was a former diplomat who seems very attuned to all that's happening in the Middle East. But they said that the Israelis have been planning to a series of about 3 stages of attacks on Iran, and that they ended up stopping at the first one because they actually encountered this Russian, whatever do you call it, anti-missile defense or something, through the radar, and that scared them, and so they stopped. And then they were talking about very specific things, so it's possible that that is true. I don't know if you'd heard that.
I hadn't heard that. I mean, we know that Iran has S-200 and S-300, and they were about to get the S-400, which my understanding is top of the line on the missile defense kind of whatever. But yeah, I didn't hear that. I didn't know that they had there was talk about them, other phases that they backed off on from pursuing.
Okay, I want to ask you something too about the Koreans too, because your take was a little bit different. From what I've heard, people were saying that it's kind of ridiculous to think that the Koreans are going to be fighting with them because the language problems make that it's so difficult to work together. But they were there probably for training or something else. So you think that they were actually there
No, no,
fighting?
no, no. I'm not saying that. No, I'm not saying that they
Oh,
are. I'd say most likely they're not, but I'd say it's a
uh-huh.
possibility. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
But I think it is. I don't see how it's not part of a deepening military
Hmm.
relationship, right? And again, like I stated that the hypocrisy of U.S. and Canada hyping up. Well, why is North Korea selling weapons to Russia, and why do they have
Yeah.
military relationships? Well, that's the hypocrisy is clear. But I do think there are deepening ties that do reflect a shifting geopolitical situation, which is moving us towards, further down the pathway of a possible World War III. And like what you're saying about if uh, Russia was involved in helping Iran defend itself, not just in the sense, I mean, certainly we know that they were involved in the sense that they sold them the S-300, and which I understand was like upgraded fairly recently by Russia, but maybe also more directly involved in the sense of like operating it. I don't know if that's true. That's also part of this, where Russia is, and I know that Putin a few days ago referred to Iran as an ally nation. I think that's a new development that's happened, recently, and it's partly due to the NATO proxy war, and it's there are the different pieces in different parts of the globe are starting to kind of solidify in a way that I think is very bad. I mean, I think in the case of Russia helping Iran to block a Israeli attack, I think that's a good thing in the narrow, of course, but in the kind of more macro level of I don't think this is where we want to go as a species. This is right as a we want right. So, but yeah.
Okay, so we have one question from Claire, and then we can let you know. 'Cause I know you have to go. Go ahead, Claire.
Yes, I just wonder, do you have the press card when when you go to events to show that you're a legitimate press
No, I don't.
person?
I don't have a press card. I do always give my name. I always say my name, and I'll write it down. Whatever. I've never. Don't think I've ever given a pseudonym or anything like that. I usually say I'm with Canadian Dimension or Rabble. I find that Canadian Dimension specifically, when you use that, which is true, I write for Canadian Dimension. I'm not like being Canadian Dimension is not commissioning me to go to these press conferences to ask these politicians things, but I do write for Canadian Dimension, so it's not a lie. The name Canadian Dimension is like Canadian Press, Canadian Dimension. Like it takes a second to like necessarily. It sounds kind of like legit or establishment or whatever. So that's usually what I do. I've given other outlets I've written for over the years. But yeah, so
Okay, so if that's it, I think we can let you go then.
thank you. Take care, everyone.
Thanks.
Good night.